Let's see, I believe I was almost 17. My wife was 15 when we got married. We had 4 children. Sandra was the oldest, Sheila, Carla, and Serena. And my wife said, well, no more kids. I wanted a boy, but no more kids. So my kids worked. We taught them to work. We taught them the values to work. And I later on went to work after I married Carolyn. I worked at the mill. I'll back the story up a little bit. I went to work at the mill. And then the mill was shutting down in 1960, and NORAD opened up Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. So my dad, and Kenny Dean, and Everett Prickett, they was all going down there to go to work. And so my dad says, we can get you a job if you want to go down there and go to work. I said, from 60 cents to $2.35? Yes, would I ever want to go down there? That was a lot of money. We lived, well, back then, if you made $100 a week, you could live like a king, and that was a lot of money. So I did. I went to work at NORAD. I was there, and that was quite a process. The Russians was trying to send us a bomb at the time, Khrushchev, and I even built a bomb shelter in my little house up there on 5th Street. It's still there. But I worried that he was going to send us that nuclear bomb, and I went to several different special schoolings. So I built a bomb shelter, and we used it as a food cellar later. But anyway, back to NORAD, we would go in, and there was 18 drilling machines, 9 on each. There was a bottom deck is called the lifters, the middle deck's called the cut deck, and the top is called the crow's nest. We would load, there was 18 machines running, and a big buzz noise, and you couldn't hear nothing. Sign language, the only thing you talk. And that's why I'm kind of hard hearing today, is because we had no ear protectors. I would use cotton in my ears. But NORAD, we worked there. I think I worked there for 2 years, and there's 3-story buildings underneath the NORAD, and it's quite there is an escape hatch, and at one time they was going to drive a tunnel to Ajax Mine and Victor so they could have another escape hatch, but that fell through and they didn't do it. But we'd use 1.5 tons powder to a round. When they drill around, 1.5 tons of dynamite to blow a hole, and then they would come in. They had track loaders, and they would load it into, we call them belly scoops, and they would haul it out. And so I worked there for off and on for 2 years. I got to work with my dad there, which was a highlight of my life. And I run a machine, and then later on I came back up to stay there at Victor, and I didn't want to go nowhere, so I went to work at the school. But I had various jobs in between. In '65, when the flood hit, I went to work for the power company, and I was watchman out there, and I worked for the power company for a while. And then my kids, back to the school, my kids would help me, and I couldn't have done it without them. At one time, I took care of both schools, and that was a lot of rooms to clean. That's before they merged. And then when they closed the Victor School in '76, we went to Copple Creek, and I had to take care of the school over there. And then I stayed there until one day the boss come in, and he told me something I didn't like, and I threw him a wad of keys, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going fishing." So I felt kind of bad, because I was making $240 a month at the school, which was pretty good back then. So I went back down. My dad was watering the garden. He always had a garden every year. And we still have a garden there. My brother does. We've had a garden there below Victor, I guess, pretty near 70 years, constant. And so I went down. My dad was watering the garden, and I sit down on a railroad tie, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I just quit that school job, and now I don't have no insurance, and I don't know what to do. And Dad said, well, it's about time you did something. Now maybe you'll do something of yourself. So I left there, and I sort of climbed the ladder after that. I went to work various jobs around. I worked for Teller County Road District. I was a Victor water superintendent. Well, in '76 they put a new water project in Victor, and I was water. But let me tell you, we need to give some of this credit back to Ken Geddes, who was attorney at the time. He worked for the city of Victor for $1 a year as an attorney until they got to squabbling over the donkeys being in town. He said, you get somebody else to hear all this. I ain't got time for it. But Jim Keeler was the mayor back then, and I went to work for the city, and John Vanderwalker, the power company, had what they call the Altman water right, and it came up for sale. Well, he approached the city of Victor, and he said, I think I can get you that water right. So anyway, back then, that was before I think the Sunshine Law went in, where you couldn't have meetings. They kind of met, and John Vanderwalker helped him out. The quarter-second foot of water that the Altman has, they bought it. And so people come to the council meeting, raising Cain, because the city went in debt for $60,000 to bought a water right because they didn't ask approval of the citizens of Victor. Well, a guy by the name of Ed Granger was there, Butch Granger, and these women was some of the women that was causing a lot of trouble at the meeting. They says, yeah, you do this and do that, and you didn't ask the citizens about what. Butch Granger says, ma'am, is that water right bothering you? Yes, we spent $60,000 that you didn't ask us. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you're very upset with that water right, I've got a guy that'll be here at the next water meeting, and he'll give Victor $1 million for that $60,000 water right that they're trying to buy. Oh, we didn't know it was worth something like that. He said, well, let us. So we got challenged in court. Colorado Springs, Beaver Park here, in Penrose, challenged the city of Victor on that water right. So we went to court on the water right, and it actually went to the Supreme Court in the state of Colorado. Well, when we went to Colorado Springs on the first go-around, the lawyers, here come McDougal and Geddes in, and Sparks, they had 11 boxes of water documents. And Colorado Springs lawyers on their side, there was 8 or 9 of them at the time. And they says, and Geddes come to me, he said, now all I want you to do is answer the questions they ask you. Answer them honestly, and we're not going to use you until the last testimony of the day. So anyway, I'm sitting outdoors, and I don't know what's going on in there, but the judge looks around, and he said, what's all 11 boxes for? He said, this is water documentation from the Altman Water Company and the power company and whatever. Because Victor, see, what they was trying to say was, we abandoned that water right, and they tried to gather it up. And they said it was over 25 years. Well, at this time, it was about the 24th year that they got challenged. So anyway, they used me as the last testimony to go into court, and the guy asked a question, and Sandy McDougal says, ask him anything you'd like. He says, Mr. Roy, can you legally say, and rightfully say, that you opened the Altman water valve? I said, I can. I worked with a man named L.Z. Davidson at the mill, and we'd go up there and we'd open that valve, and that would send water to the mill from the Altman Dam. And it was getting late, and this guy drank quite a bit, I think, and he went to shaking, and he said, no further questions. So the court was over. Well, then later they had to go to Denver, I think, and this stuff went up to Denver, I believe, to the Colorado Supreme Court at the time, and Victor was awarded that quarter-second foot. which is 546,272 gallons per 24 hours. Now that's what the mine is operating on up home today. And hopefully that mine, that city of Victor, this is my own personal opinion, but nobody should have to pay a water bill, because there should be enough money coming in from that mine to take care of them citizens of Victor. Now, I don't know what their money is, and I don't really care or whatever, but that water's worth a lot of money. And we've had some good mayors there. Daniel's been a good one. He's fought for Victor. We've had a lot of good council people, but you know, times people die off and you're gone, so things kind of go by the wayside. And as far as Victor goes, it's a wonderful place, a lot of good memories, but it's went downhill. This is my own personal opinion. It's been downhill ever since I was a little guy, and by what I mean by that was we've sort of lost everything. The people used to stay together pretty well in Victor, and you don't always get your way, but you get to vote anyway. But way back when they pulled the railroad out, which went out in 1949, they built the Carlton Mill. That's when they was building the Carlton Mill. They waited till they got it built, and they didn't need the railroad to go to Colorado Springs anymore. So when the railroad went out, why, the next thing you know, we lost our Victor School. Well, in the Victor School, when we lost it, then we lost our Teller County barn, our road maintenance. And then after we lost it, we kind of lost our power company. And there was no reason for them to have to move out of there, except some people was complaining about some power poles that was there, stacked out in the yard. So they moved to Cripple Creek. Now we lost our chief of police. We no longer have a police there. The Teller County Sheriff's Department does patrol it, and I think they do a good job. But it's kind of went downhill, and I always wanted to, if I was ever wanted to do something for Victor, was build a swimming pool, and it never happened. But when I was a child, that was the most precious thing we had, was to go to Cripple Creek and go swimming in the summertime. Everybody pitched in and did their civic duty, mainly. I was volunteer fire chief for 25 years, and I served 2 terms, I think, as the city council. I served Boy Scout Master. I helped in the Baptist church. Head of the search and rescue for 25 years. And we helped and we worked with everybody. I basically never drank. For all I've drank of hard liquor, you can put in a couple water glasses. So I'd seen enough of that when I was a kid, and we did hang out in the bars when we was kids. We could go in and sit in the booth and have potato chips and pop. Of course, my dad drank a little back then, and we'd hang out there at night, someplace to go. And we had a bowling alley in Victor, and we bowled on leagues. We had a nice picture show, cost a dime to get in, and we had American Legion there. Harshburgers, of course, everybody hung around Harshburgers. You get a nice malt for $0.25. And down the street from Harshburgers, we had the Legion Hall, and then, of course, the show. Across the street was Barnett Furniture, Glenna Smith. Lida had the Stope Cafe and Bar, and in between we had the bowling alley. And then across the street the other way, we had Walt Rounds, the grocery. And on down that street, you had the Hackley Hotel, you had the Hanson Apartments, and then Fisk lived in the house down where the mortuary used to be way back. And then on the other side of the street, from Harshburgers going up, we had Kopelke had a jewelry store there. Then there was the Amber Inn. Johnson's owned it. They served good food. And then from there on up the street, there was Dixmoor's Cleaner. And then Boo Boo Roberts had a wine and beer shop or liquor store above there. And then on the corner there was a drugstore, but I can never remember it running, but there was a nice drugstore on the corner. And of course across the street was a 4-story hotel, and there was nothing in it then when I was a kid. It wasn't fixed up till later on. But down the street from there was Downs's grocery store. And then there was a pie shop. Mrs. Butler had a pie shop there. And soup and pie. And then on down next to the alley there at one time, and I don't remember it, but that was called a Red and White grocery store. And then on below it was a Silver Dollar Cafe. Mrs. Johnson run it. And then below there was Charlie Clark's grocery store. And then below there was Bodecker's barber shop, Zeke's bar, and then the drugstore. And across the street was a gold coin bar. Then there was the post office building, then the J.C. Penney store, and then on this side it was the mortuary. And then the building between there and the Elks, there was an assay office building there, and then the Elks Club. Well, then you come back down the other side, then the trade and transfer was across the street from there. And you come down on the other side of the street, Kessel's owned the building, and I can remember a woman having a beauty salon shop in there because they had these canisters these women put over their hair with all these wires hooked to them. And then on down below it, I can't remember it running, but there was a building called the Fox Theater. Well, my dad and my brother-in-law tore it down in '52, and they still have them lots today. They've paid taxes on them since 1952. I think they've got some junk stored there now or whatever, some trucks and backhoes and whatever. But then on the other side, they built that new addition. But Tom Hill had a filling station there, and my dad ran it at one time, and I worked there pumping gas. In fact, I remember changing the tire for Bob Beach, and at the time they had a little white Valiant car, and they had a flat tire on the Valiant car, and they brought it in there, and I changed it. And Bob Beach come in, and he kind of got upset at me. I stacked a bunch of heavy weights. I fixed the tire and set it on the floor, but I put some heavy weights on it, and it was on that little rim, and that little white Valiant was a pretty small car, you know. And I didn't bend the rim or nothing, but I can understand why I had a bunch of junk on it, heavy weights. But anyway, we run that, and then on down Mrs. Musser ran a little place there. It was just a little kind of a pie shop between there and Eddie Seals. And then later on, a guy by the name of Jim Nola moved in there. Back then, I worked several different mines, but Earl Robush had the El Paso mine, and we went to work. He hired me there, and I was down on the second level called a jewelry stope, and they shipped a lot of high-grade gold out of there in the early days. And here come the mine inspector down, and he come back here and he says, "Young man, you look awful young to be working underground." I said, "Oh, I'm 18. He said, "Okay." He said, "By the way, I need your social security number." And I said, "Okay." So I gave it to him. I memorized it by heart. And I gave it to him. About 2 days later, I was down working in the underground, and Earl, the buzzer rang. He sent the bell signals for me to come up. So I went over and I thought, what's going on? So I went up there, and mine inspector said, "Mr. Roy, you're only 16 years old. You told me you was 18. Now you can work on top at the mine, but you can't work underground." So that Earl had to let me go. So that was my end of my El Paso mine. But later on, I was real thankful that I did get to work at several different mines. Like I say, I worked Teller County and the city of Victor, but Minerex Corporation, he come to town, a guy by the name of Lloyd Quinn. And he asked me if I would do some drilling for him. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure. What do you want?" And he says, "Well, I'm over on Mineral Hill." And he says, I I want to do some drilling over there. And he says, I own 35 acres. I said, okay. So I went over. Bud Piper at the time, he was delivering fuel. He delivered us fuel from Cripple Creek. And I went down there, and a guy by the name of Lou Altman, he lived in Cripple Creek. He says, Carl, well, Mineral Hill, my brother's drilling there today, but I've heard many sources, June Hack and all of them, that the mother lode of the gold will be on Mineral Hill. Now, I have no idea. But anyway, I went to work there, and on the third drill hole, I intercepted half-ounce ore. And so this guy sank a shaft down, and there's his bean cans and his tobacco cans and that. And this is all done with hand steel and black powder back then. And he missed that vein by 4 feet. There was what we call float, and he was finding float. That means gold, some rocks with gold in it, but where'd they come from? And he was chasing that float. Well, that fourth drill hole, we intercepted ore. So then Quinn came out. He was an oil man from Indiana. And he said to me, he said, I want to shut this job down. I want you to start buying property. So anyway, for the next 4 years, he furnished the money. The title company out of Woodland Park did the work, and Brian Geddes was an attorney. For the next 4 years, I went and bought property. I went to Arizona, I went everywhere traveling. He paid me a good salary. And so anyway, after 4 years, I put about 600 acres together. So we start back up drilling again. And I found this ore. There's actually run 35 ounces per ton was the best. They call it the Little Hope Tunnel. And they leased it out to Texas Gulf at the time. And a guy drove a tunnel in and raised up 80 feet, and they poured 6 85-pound bars of gold out of that tunnel. So I'm still continuing working for Mr. Quinn, and I worked 11 years for him, and we never got off of 4 acres, and I put 600 together. And today, I'm not sure the guy's name is there now, but Downen, he was a coal guy out of Chicago. He owned it, and I think he sold it. But anyway, back to Mineral Hill, the reason they call it Mineral Hill, I guess, there's every kind of rock you can imagine has been found there. There's been fire opals, there's been turquoise, there's been iron pyrites, there's sylvanite, there's free gold, and all the placer gold in Cripple Creek, if you'll look in the early days, all the placer come off of that hill behind what they call a nursing home. And they're all placer claims, a lot of them up through there. And where that gold come from, nobody knows to this day. But they are still continue drilling there. Private individuals are still drilling there today.